I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
Well, we are all seeking enlightenment as we travel down this journey of life, mindfulness, or Zen Buddhism. Hey, Nikki, you enlightened?
Hey, yeah, I was just thinking, I'm like, yeah, so we picked a really light topic for this week, just super light topic of enlightenment, just easy discussion here, right?
Easy breezy. But here we are just going to break down what enlightenment is, how it is interpretive and taught within Zen Buddhism, maybe thinking about how that is in behaviorism.
Not going to be a lot to say about it on behaviorism, but I think I would maybe like to talk about and hear your thoughts about sort of maybe how it's misunderstood in Western culture.
Maybe personality disorders and behaviorism.
Right. Yeah. Maybe that. Yeah. So, but like, but I'm saying even broader than psychology, it's sort of just like a Western culture, I think that word is thrown around a lot, I think. Right. But we don't often really, I never really learned about it, what it really was until, I learned from you, honestly,
Yeah, we don't talk a lot about it. I mean, I went to Catholic school, so we had world religions. Did you ever have a world religion class?
I did not, no.
So it's so crazy.
Not in my public school, or I didn't, and I wasn't as interested in that when I was in college, so.
If you had the choice today, would you take it?
Absolutely, 100%, I would. Yeah.
And I wish I was more engaged and probably learned it and cheat on a test. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. You're like that. Okay. So can you maybe start can you talk a little bit about maybe like what enlightenment is from a Buddhist lens?
So the way they teach it, and I've talked about the Four Noble Truths on here before. So the first noble truth, that we all suffer. The second is that suffering is created by attachment. The third noble truth is that the Eightfold Path allows to release that attachment. And the fourth is enlightenment.
Okay.
Sometimes also called nirvana.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Depends on like sort of whatever like lineage you're reading. The idea is it's like the Buddha under the Bodhi tree. Right?
Well, can you say more about that? Because I'm guessing probably a lot of listeners don't know about the Buddha under the Bodhi tree.
Well, so Siddhartha, and I don't know, and there's definitely going to be a scholar listening, or maybe not because they're not listening. But if there were a scholar listening, they would say like this is wrong or inaccurate. The way that I understand it is that Siddhartha was like royalty, and he said like I'm still suffering, like what's going on with this? I want to go be in the common people, and so he left like all his jewels, left the palace, and went and sat underneath a Bodhi tree, which is just a really pretty tree with lots of branches that go in all over directions, and become enlightened, or just, detach and find some peace. And so that was, termed enlightenment. Now,
and that's the Buddha. And I think you maybe to say, and then that's who the Buddha was, right?
That's seen
by the story, right?
By that story.
Yeah.
But there's no real Buddha.
Right.
Because everyone's Buddha. So like after.
So keep going with that, right? Because I'm imagining the metaphorical wheels turning, or
for our two yogi friends that are probably listening, when you say namaste at the end of the class, what you're saying is I see the light inside you that's also inside me. And that's really the like teaching within Zen Buddhism, is that we all have that inner light, no matter how dim or bright it might be. And that's what the Buddha teaching is that. So in Christianity, you're praying to Jesus or to God. In Hinduism or some other, in Hinduism, you have multiple gods depending on which, branch you are. In, Islam, you have Allah. Buddhism doesn't have one person that they're not praying to. There's no deity. And so while this story is meant to embody the art and act of relinquishing attachment, so because it also depends, like, there's many different like images of Buddha too, depending on the part of the world that you're in.
Yes.
So I think that's important. Like there's not just one Buddha. So yes, Siddhartha was seen as like maybe the first Buddha. I don't even, probably, I guess, because he made that step. But all of that to say, Nikki, there's no such thing as enlightenment.
That's where everybody's like, what?
Why did I tune
into? Why did I tune into this episode? So say more about that, because again, and I'm, by the way, just for listeners to know, as I've said many times, like I'm, I've not studied Buddhism in depth as Pete has. I consider myself like Buddhist informed, so to speak, because of, I
I'm
ascribe
Buddhist
to,
informed too, but
yes,
yeah.
well, but more significantly more than myself, that I ascribe to the worldview and all of the practices. And I just love hearing Pete talk about this stuff because I learn a lot of things that I don't know. So I'm also speaking for myself when I'm like, oh, help explain, like there's no such thing as enlightenment.
It's hard. It's hard. It's, a lot of this is in the mind. And so I had a colleague of mine who was remembering the anniversary of the passing of their father. It's a really good friend of mine. And she said to me, like, how do you deal with death? And like, how do I just want to hug my dad. And I was like, you just did. And that was like, I watched her brain kind of work to process because she was like, I don't get it. And I'm like, well, that's really what this is all about. It's like, whatever you want to accomplish, you've already accomplished. Right. And so with enlightenment, the issue about it not existing is because once you feel like you've arrived at that, which is supposed to be this like ultimate inner peace, like freedom from attachment, freedom from suffering is really what it is.
Yes.
If you ever feel like you've arrived, then you're not arrived, because then you're posturing that you've arrived. You're like, yes, I've gotten this thing and I've won. But there's no arrival.
Well, and I think what's coming to my mind as you're saying that as well is this concept that, and I can't remember if I've said this on this podcast or before, but a friend, and I know I've definitely talked to Pete about it. I have a friend who always says this like quote of like, we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
I love that. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Dr. Mia Sage, she's the one that.
Hey, Mia.
Hey, Mia. Mia says that. Yeah. So
she better be listening.
Yeah. she may be. So I'll tell her to listen to this episode if she hasn't. So, this idea, this concept of we're spiritual beings having a human experience, like that kind of stands out to me in what you're saying right now, Pete, because it's like the point of the human experience is that we're not going to figure it out, right? That's like the whole point, right? Like there's never going to be a moment where we're free from attachment, or we don't feel pain, or we don't struggle, or we don't suffer, or we don't fight reality, because that's how human experience is designed. As another colleague of mine likes to say, like, I don't know who's in charge of this stuff, but like, this is how it works. Right. And so, I think, like, I don't know, does that resonate with you?
It's
that
beautiful.
Sort of,
it's spirituality.
Right.
And I think that would probably be what we're trying to do in any kind of enlightenment was just trying to get to a place of like, can I connect to a spiritual existence? And in whatever way that means. So in relinquishing attachment, I'm able to connect in a more deep way.
Yes.
And that's what we're ultimately trying to do. I mean, it's how do I let go of anything so that I can connect in this moment as deeply as possible? And it's a really beautiful thing.
It is. No, it like brings a tear to my eye when you're saying that, because I think
that's easy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but there are degrees of what tear you bring to my eye, and it's like
but hold on. Let me ask you, because
please.
Maslow, and so I think we were saying like it's not really behaviorism, but Maslow would say it's like self-realization, that self-actualization. Like I wonder if you could, like, do you see a connection there?
I mean, sure, though I think that, but I mean, like a little bit, but I think self-actualization again has a real quality of, like there is an endpoint where I think and again, the English word enlightenment has an endpoint sound to it, though the concept that you're describing is like, we don't reach it, like not in this human experience. And like what you're saying, Pete, the part that brings, like a deeper tear to my eye is that yes, what is being on this planet about as spiritual beings having these human experiences. Yeah. It's like, I ascribe to the belief that it's about connection, and connection, is something that we always have access to. Connection with ourselves, connections with other humans, connections with animals, connections with nature.
Yes.
And we're going to keep getting in our own way as
all
humans, right? All the time, like that's part, like that we can't undo that, right?
So what just came to my mind as you said that is Seaspiracy. Have you seen that? It's like I've seen it like on as an advertisement. Is it Netflix? It's one of them.
I think it's on Netflix. I think so. Yeah.
Watch it.
Okay.
because
What's
I
it
think,
about? Like, just for those of
well,
us.
for the listeners, Seaspiracy is about the sea, and just really the conspiracies of the sea and fishing. So it starts off with this gentleman's journey about like all the plastic in the ocean. And like, there's really like a lot of like aha moments, like 80% of all living beings are in the ocean. And I know I learned that at some point,
Yeah,
but
but
like
it's also when
hearing
you
that
hear
again,
it.
I
Yeah,
just
it's
was
like,
like,
wow.
wow,
Yeah.
that just like,
Yeah.
really blows your mind. And they're showing some of the less favorable practices in fishing, which includes killing dolphins and whales because they're eating like tuna or more expensive fish. And watching it, and again, you don't have to be vegan, you don't have to be anything other than if you connect, like Nikki just said, to like other animals, trees. Again, I always tell that story. Like when I started studying Buddhism first, I started with Tibetan, and one of the first things I connected with were trees, which not in like a tree hugging way. So slow your roll, all listeners out there, but in a way of like, they're not worried about like how they're being seen as they're either being blown on a really windy day or not. They're so grounded in the earth, and they're still.
Yeah. And it's like, and I think, and those are those things we can also, it's like that kind of connection hits us in a way that sometimes like we can't cognitively explain, and there's, Pete just said it, and we've said it in the podcast before. It's like, that is to us how we would define like spirituality, right? And of course, it's up to every person to decide if that word resonates with them or if they consider themselves to be spiritual beings. It's just one way to look at it. Though I will say, whether someone wants to use that word or not, I've actually never met a person that hasn't told me of that kind of experience of feeling connection to nature, to people, to animals, to something, and I think, it's like, I think that's maybe what you're sort of explaining when it comes to enlightenment, right? It's like moving towards that, and that I don't know, is this kind of right, that we're working to move towards that, and it's the process of moving towards that allows us the opportunity to connect. It's not the end. It's not sort of the end point here.
Well,
is that or not, or is it? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one of the main teachings from Dogen is that we all are already enlightened. And that it's inherent in us.
Is it like about is it like remembering? It's like, I feel like there's like a concept sometimes in like Eastern traditions where it's like remembering who, like we, in our, in our.
I don't get that stuff. There is a big piece of that. Yeah.
Well, it's because I'm thinking,
so right. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about, Pete and I also, did an episode on intuition, and it's like a reconnecting. We talked about.
Say that.
Yes, ESP. We often have.
Same person.
It's about like returning back to listening to a part of yourself that's always been there. That, that we get, like, our human experiences get in the way, and our human brains get in the way of accessing that. And so, I don't know. There's something about, it's like remembering a part of ourselves that we disconnect from, that we forget.
Well, and I was also thinking intuition, I think it was last week we talked about that, was also about like how it's all in us. It's a matter of accessing it. And so that's really sort of this teaching that Dogen gave around enlightenment, is that it's all in us. It's just a matter of accessing it. When you go into like remembering your reincarnate selves, that's where my human brain is like putting on the brakes.
Oh yeah. Well, that's because like that's where, and I mean, it would be interesting to do. Actually, I would love to do an episode talking to somebody about, belief about reincarnation, because I have limited knowledge about that, but I also like a lot of the concepts of that, right? Which I guess, like, I'll just share one of the ones that I've
sure.
I hope anyone listening, please message us if I'm incorrect about this. But one thing I read once was that reincarnation is not the concept of like, oh, you were bad in this life, so you come back as a slug in the next life. It's that something, and I believe it comes from Hinduism. I think that the concept is that in order to learn all the lessons that we're meant to learn, that humans have to live 100 lifetimes, or or spiritually, and that you have to be every experience. You have to be, be the one being hurtful to somebody and be hurt. You have to like have and I find that very comforting, because when the teaching is that, from my understanding, is that if you encounter somebody, for example, that's doing something that's like not okay or inappropriate, it's like they would say that person has more lifetimes to live, right?
Yeah.
To learn the lessons, you know?
Yeah, it's hard for that's the teaching, and it's hard for me to understand it. Like one of the teachers I followed and read a lot about originally was Galak Rinpoche, and he was one of the last Tibetan monks that had to flee the monastery. So as a young kid, he was picked out as a reincarnate of one of the Dalai Lamas. So he was put into the monastery, and he had to flee, Tibet. So that ended up, and then he fled. Right, English teacher.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, he fled. I'm like, yes. What? I'm like, yeah, fled. Yeah, he fled. Yeah.
And then he also became like a normal person. Like he kind of like said goodbye for a little bit for that part of his life, and then eventually kind of returned back to it. So he has a very interesting kind of human life.
Yes.
And my human brain really puts the brakes on, because I believe in reincarnation for whatever that means.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know what it means,
Yeah.
but I remember learning it in high school because I went to Catholic high school, and being like, yeah, okay, like that makes sense. And I remember being like, well, isn't that what I was Like, I thought I was taught that as a Catholic, but I wasn't.
You weren't.
But it just felt right to me.
Well, what's funny, because it's, I keep hearing you say, you're like, my human brain, but it's like, not to say there isn't any human brain limitation stuff going on here, but actually, I don't think that that's what the dominant thing getting in the way is. I think that's the Western cultural context getting in the way, because you know what I mean? Because I think that in addition to the Catholicism, a potential
that gets in the
piece,
way
right?
of a lot of things.
That's that it's just like a different lens, right? It's a different system of beliefs, and so these concepts Pete and I are discussing today, and of course Enlightenment in particular, it's like it's not a part of Western culture, and a lot of like Judeo-Christian religions. And so I think somebody that's raised in a Eastern spiritual tradition, I don't know if they would maybe feel those limitations quite so much. You know what I'm saying? It's like our sort of impulsivity culture, or instant gratification culture, and also goal oriented. It's like, I think that's where these concepts, like these more sort of circular, non-linear concepts, are like hard to integrate. You know what I mean? It's like, even that's what I'm thinking about, like nirvana or enlightenment. It's like the way it's talked about in Western culture, at least in American culture, it's always seen as like something to achieve, right? Like
because we're always looking to achieve. Yeah. Well, so maybe that's our behaviorism. Maybe that's the Western behaviorism part of it, why it gets so confused and convoluted.
Yeah, because that's how we organize things, and we talk about this in our values episode.
Yeah, we do. And I was just texting about my pilot is reading the book and listening to our podcast, and he's like, I don't get it. Like, if someone cuts you off and they keep getting your way, like at a certain point you got to watch your back and you got to do something to get to where you're going. And I'm like, yeah, but then you're trying to win.
Yeah.
And so like, what about if you could just relinquish winning?
Well, and then it comes back to what you said of like, be in this moment and see that there's an opportunity to connect in this moment. Like, what can you connect to? I mean, like that. Yes. I mean, I got to tell you, like this. I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot right now talking to you about this, because I never understood until just this conversation that that's what enlightenment was. Like that it was about like that we're already enlightened. Like I actually didn't realize that. Like that. I mean, that's like, I'm really gonna like carry that with me today. Like that's really powerful.
Because you are enlightened, Dr. Rubin.
And as are you, Dr. Pete, right? and as according to what you're saying, as are all of our listeners.
Jinx.
Yeah.
Well, this was great. Listeners, we are all enlightened. Access it, be open to it. And if you feel like you've achieved or that you've arrived, stop, look back, and let it go.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.